How's everybody doing? Today's video is going to be something that I have never really done before. Delving into a bit of a music review, I suppose, but it's really going to be my favorite album of this year, of 2023. So I may make this a tradition going forward towards the end of the year, just make my favorite album of whatever year it is. Because, I listen to a whole lot more music than I actually write, and I think most people would do the same. So it's interesting to, to just discuss some other artists and, sort of break it down and explain why. This isn't going to be a reaction video necessarily, but it's going to be a description of what I like about this album and why in detail. So check out any of the songs or the whole album if this sounds appealing to you by the time we're done. If not, let me know why this album sucks in the comments. So my favorite album of this year is one that I would not have guessed, but maybe that's not fair to say. I mean, I've liked an album of theirs in the past, but it was very different from this. So it's hard to compare this album to anything, really. So I'll just say it's unexpected for that reason. So without further ado, I Never Had the Will. The album that is my favorite of this year is Life Is But a Dream by Avenged Sevenfold. So the interesting thing is, I did enjoy their album Hail to the King, which I think came out like in 2013, and it was a very straightforward, like hard rock sort of metal style album. Throughout their career, they have taken a lot of different rock and metal influences and combined them, and some of them are to anyone's taste and some of them are not to anyone's taste. But actually, I have to say, since listening to Life Is But a Dream, I have gone back and found enjoyment in every one of their albums that I have listened to. So it's gotten me on like an Avenged Sevenfold listening party for a while. But that's not what this video is about. This is just about Life Is But a Dream and what makes this album genius, a masterpiece, phenomenal, best album I've heard all year. So basically the theme of this album is, it varies a little bit, but it's basically just kind of about life. I think the title, Life Is But a Dream, is sort of alluding to maybe the fact that, when we dream, we experience something that happens and then we wake up and it's something different. And the album definitely addresses a lot of the monotony of waking up and experiencing the same thing and going to sleep, and then waking up and experiencing the same thing and then going to sleep, and wakefulness and dreaming. And even as it applies to an entire lifetime, it's like, could this entire lifetime just be a dream and kind of insignificant in the scheme of things, is kind of, I think, what they're going for. So I'm going to now go through song by song and sort of describe what I like about each song. I will say that the first time I listened to this album, my best friend sent it to me and said I have to hear it, and I listened to it when I was driving home from work and I wasn't giving it full attention, and I was like, what is happening here? There's all these different styles. I mean, beyond just rock and metal, there's literally all different styles on the album, and some of them I was like, man, I'm not really feeling this, but I was not really focusing on it. And by the time I got home from work, I was just like, I don't know what I'm hearing right this second, but I'm going to turn it off and I'll just go back to it later. So when I got back to it later, and the more times I've heard it, the more I've actually liked it. So I went from being like I thought it was pretty milquetoast at first, and then the more I heard it, with each listen I liked it more and I understood the themes more. And then I went through a whole round of it, listening and just reading the lyrics along. And it's just, there's a lot of really great things about this album. So anyway, so the very first song is called Game Over. so there's a lot of sarcasm in the titles and lyrics in this album, but it's for a very sort of dark theme, I guess you could say. So Game Over begins with a very sort of mafia sounding acoustic guitar intro with a very heavy plucking style. It sounds very like, yeah, kind of like a mafia theme almost. Then it transitions into some heavier riffing, some fast riffing, a drum pattern that could be generic if it was played straightforward, but is actually played very tastefully by the drummer. So we have kind of like a double time feel going on with the drums, a heavy riff, and then the vocals as we go into this song are sort of a mid sort of pitch, very heavy, fast, a bit of a scream, and it is very reminiscent of like Serj Tankian in a way when he does that sort of like middle of the range, like just driving straight forward screaming. And he's basically describing things very quickly that are things that happen throughout a person's lifetime. So I take that as it's a person's life sort of flashing before them. They're at sort of a point of crisis, you could say. So it goes from the life flashing before his eyes, rapid screaming and, fast paced. Then the song cleans up entirely and the vocals clean up and all of the chaos stops and the man realizes that he does not belong in this world anymore, and he comes to the decision to end himself. So it's not the deepest message on this album, but it's a little deep, but it's a good sort of appetizer for what's to come, what the audience will have to dissect. The next song is called Mattel, which is apparently a toy manufacturer who makes toys like dolls, so that's a direct tie to what the theme is on the song. It starts off with a pretty average to me heavy riff, heavy drums. The drumming is very tasteful. Actually, the first few times I listened to this album, I had to really focus on the drumming to enjoy it, because I knew I could consistently enjoy the drumming, but I couldn't really consistently get around every other piece the first few listens. But I've listened to this album probably 30 times by now, and there's really nothing I don't like at this point. The lyrics entirely describe an experience where everything in the world is fake, hence Mattel, as if we are living as toys in the world without any autonomy. The vocals are largely clean on this. They have some effects on, which is kind of like a heavy reverb at times and almost like a flanger. I don't know if that's the same effect on a vocal as it would be on a guitar, but it kind of sounds like that. Although there are a couple of very brutal sounding screams in the song. And once again, there's a drastic shift where the heavy guitar and drums and everything and bass cleans up for the chorus, where the viewpoint is that we're all toys. I've smelled the plastic daisies in the world. Everything's plastic, everything's fake, nothing really matters that much. So I've smelled the plastic daisies and it seems that we've found ourselves in hell, is the line. So then we get a solo that is very wild in terms of guitar work. Just sounds very chaotic, but it sounds like a synth more than a guitar. I mean, there's a few moments in this album where it is very difficult to discern if you're hearing a guitar or something completely different, but this is one of them, probably the first example where we get this sound that's this like wailing sort of synth sound that sounds very processed, and it's kind of like, what are we hearing, Which I guess makes sense. You wouldn't want to have a soulful guitar solo in a song that is about how everything's fake. I mean, it's a very synthesized sound, but underneath of that guitar solo is a drum section, which is one of my favorites on the album. There is an extremely heavy double bass kick going on, just going off like a machine gun, with a really nice groove on top of it that even if you don't like really chaotic guitar solos, just listen to the drums and you'd be like, oh, this is just absolutely great. And then we get to the bridge, which really nails and hammers home the theme of the lyrics for this song for me, which Basically, he says, we're living fain in porcelain and just smart enough to know nothing at all, which is genius to admit, you know? And also how we have a semblance of choice in the world, but actually there's no choice at all. So that song is a genius concept, and it ends with a groove on the drums and an arrangement that takes us out almost feeling like a Queen song, which is kind of needed after such a heavy message, and it gives you a minute to process that message. Although it took me more than a minute to process, it took me like several listens to really process the message of that song and to realize how genius it is. But it is a fantastic song. The next song on the album is called Nobody. Right away, it comes in with a very like industrial rock sound. I wouldn't really call it metal, but it's a very industrial, almost like Nine Inch Nails-ish, but a little heavier, maybe. It's hard to describe. It's just this very like straightforward, not too fast, not too complicated, very sort of basic riff, where the guitar tone is also, once again, hard to recognize as a guitar, but it is a guitar riff. Highly processed sound. And once again, for what could otherwise be a very basic sounding beat, the drums on this song are done very tastefully, which is much appreciated. The vocals on this entire song are a little bit less dynamic than what we've heard so far, but they are definitely very, very M Shadows. It has that grit to it. It's a little bit pushed, but it's not screaming. But it's pushed enough to where it sounds very gritty, and there's only a few moments where it cleans up a little bit, and you get a bit of a relief from that. But the vocals are within a similar range throughout the entire song. So it's definitely a familiar vocal timbre, although with a bit of a heavier anchor and just sort of lifting into a really solid place where there's just a nice amount of breakup, I guess. There's a few moments where the main vocal, I guess you could say, is repeating, and then there's another stanza, I guess, underneath that is happening with like another sort of flanger type effect. But the vocals themselves are so powerful that it's almost like pushing through the flanger, and it sounds like really nice. There's a prominent use of horns in this song that almost complement the main riff very nicely, but it gives it this sort of driving industrial sound, but with horns. There's actually a lot of instrumentation that builds throughout this song. There's also really, really nice drumming as far as where it seems like he's hitting the bell of a cymbal kind of a lot, almost to replicate like a trap hi-hat, but it's like hitting the bell as well. And the parts where it sounds like he's hitting that bell of a larger cymbal rather than the hi-hat would make me want to buy that cymbal. If I was a drummer, I would want to know exactly what cymbal he's hitting because it sounds like phenomenal. So the instrumentation builds up, we get the horns, we get some strings. There's a break where there is a vocal with very many layers that is also sort of like Queen. It's probably the second moment that reminded me of Queen in this album. And it builds up this great drama by doing that, just to explain that it builds up a lot of drama to explain the insignificance of basically a persona, with the song title being Nobody. The message of this song seems to me to be kind of about how we're basically nobody in the scheme of things. It's kind of saying like I'm the God, I'm everything and all this and that, but then in the end of it, it's nobody. So it's kind of like in the scheme of things, we're kind of insignificant, even though we are everything, but we're also nobody. And at some point, we just don't exist anymore. And that song ends with a very shreddy, but also very jazzy solo that sounds like if Steve Vai was a little bit more like neoclassical than he would be playing it almost. It's like it sort of lands on sort of odd jazzy notes here and there, and it does these very interesting runs when the drums are like following exactly what the run is, but it's still kind of a dark metal sounding shreddy solo at the same time. It's interesting in that sense. It seems like it would be a nightmare to learn that solo. It would be a complete nightmare. The next song is called We Love You. It opens with very heavy drums, almost like another sort of double time type thing, and a very chaotic, hectic melody. And then the vocals come in, and he's basically in a register where he could almost be baby talking you and saying like, oh, you've come so far and all this, you can do anything, you can do everything. It's kind of like this sort of like reassuring message, except there's this effect on it where the vocals are like barely coming through like half the time, and it's like cutting out really bad and it's hard to hear. And then it goes straight into basically like a dance beat with 808s with just like almost like a disco drum beat. And he's talking about, sarcastically, once again, this whole album is almost entirely sarcastic whenever there's something positive, but he's basically saying like more this, more that, build this, build that, and all kinds of things that people would be praised for throughout life, like basically saying, we love you for getting more of this, we love you for building this, but it's very like superficial kind of, and it's very sarcastic. Like in the chorus, he's basically saying, look at the way you go, you're one in a million, and it shows, and we love you. And it's kind of like, okay, it's like, why would you ever write a song like that in such a sarcastic sense? But that's kind of the whole theme of it. It's pretty smart in its own right, although musically this is not one of my favorite songs on the album, because it is more chaos than musical, but it does have its moments. We get a couple repetitions of that sort of dance beat. We get a section of like a thrash metal riff and some pretty heavy, brutal sounding screams. We get a solo that is very chaotic, sort of like a quick chaotic shred solo, which fits the song pretty well. The guitar tone is like very bright and clear, but it's just, you know, it sounds like a guitar. It's not overly processed on this one, but it's a little, it does its job, but the tone is nothing spectacular. And then as this song winds down, it ends with an outro that sounds like basically a couple of toothless hillbillies could have played that on their rickety front porch in a bog living in the deep south. And there's like some like humming sort of like gang vocals in the background. It just sounds like very swampy all of a sudden. The next song on the album is called Cosmic. This song opens with basically just clean vocals and like an organ playing, and it comes off as a very like by the book songwritery style song, almost written like an Elton John song in a way. Definitely not what I would call metal, although I don't know anything about metal. Anybody could tell you that. But the drums come in on this song once again very tastefully. The drums are probably the most stylish part of the album if you're looking for something consistent to hold on to get your way through it, and it's definitely very tasteful and cosmic. The lyrics on this are sort of about how we try to embody love on our infinite journey through the universe, and only sometimes we get it right. So it sounds like it's from the perspective of someone who has died, who is basically saying, you'll find me as roses dancing in the wind, as love. You'll find me as a drawing on a cave in prehistoric times. Like, this is what I'm meant to be, sort of love going through the universe. It's definitely the only song, perhaps, with a positive message, but it's easily the most positive message on this album. We get a guitar solo about halfway through which is once again very jazzy sounding, and the guitar and drums sort of build, but it's nice, it's jazzy, but it's not super dark, it's more pleasant. And then once that solo breaks open, we get a more subdued drum beat and then just piano. And then we get layered vocals where there's one low octave and one higher octave, basically reiterating the message of you'll find me as love in all these different places in the universe. Whether or not that's after the guy in question has ended himself is another question, because it seems like he would have, I guess, with how the rest of the album went, but you don't have to look at it that way. I can listen to that song and just think of it as a positive message regardless of anything. And then once the slower sort of layered vocals and the piano runs its course, we get a brief moment that sounds like the song. It's like a very synthesizer type sound that occurs, and it almost sounds like the Postal Service, that band, and almost like a Boss slicer pedal or something, where it's just like the pitch is like just fluttering up and down, but it's kind of like predetermined type synthesizer sound. And then it breaks into this section where the drumming is incredible in my opinion. It's very busy, but it's a very nice groove. The snare is always sitting perfectly. It's like a really satisfying drum part to listen to, but it's very busy. Also, the lower drums, like whatever he has on the floor, is tuned very low and dark, but the higher toms are almost sounding like fake, like 80s toms, because they're tuned so tight and bright. And it's a really nice contrast when he does fills on those and it goes back to just like the lower tuned drums. It sounds to me weird, but it sounds very cool. It was a really cool choice to set it up that way. And then during that section, there's a lot of instrumentation that rolls in, and we also have some vocals with like a vocoder that sounds like it could be Daft Punk almost, in this grandiose building up sort of. It's like they're throwing every instrument they have in the studio at this part of this song, kind of, and it gives it this huge sound and this building sound, and with like the same message as before about how you know where you'll find me, like the concept of love trying to find its place in the universe, but sounding like Daft Punk vocals almost. And then towards the very end, there's a cleaner vocal that comes in that just builds up to the finale, and then the song ends with just violins and cellos on a shorter sort of outro after that, just to sort of let it down. And it's just like, it's a great song. It's the type of song that if you're in the right mood, it'll like give you chills. The next song is probably my least favorite on the album. It's called Beautiful Morning. Starting off, it sounds almost like a modern day Alice in Chains. Basically, maybe it's because of the sort of grungy, slow but heavy sounding riff, and then maybe the interval on the vocal harmony sounds like very much like Alice in Chains to me, at least. And it's maybe the least interesting musical song, although it sounds good. It sounds really good, but it's the least interesting to me, I guess. It also has the least obvious message, in my opinion. It's basically just kind of this creepy message about how great everything is, I guess, but it sounds very like sarcastic and weird and like off-putting. There's a part in the song that, like, the heavy sort of Alice in Chains sounding part sort of takes a break, and then we get this weird melody. It's like talking about how it's a beautiful morning and everybody's smiling in such a beautiful way, and it's just very unnatural and weird to seem so positive. And I guess that's the point. They're pointing out how unnatural it seems to be positive at this point. So I guess the song does its job in the album, but by itself, it's probably the least interesting song to me. But it does, by the end of it, sounds kind of like a weird, creepy version of a Beatles song, like out of a nightmare or something. the whole beautiful morning thing and taking a walk outside and whatever it goes into. It's just kind of eerie, but it's arranged to sound almost like a Beatles song by that point. So it's a very weird blend. It's good, but it's my least favorite on the whole album. The next song on the album is called Easier. This song begins with another sort of vocoder sounding Daft Punk chorus. Actually, it starts with a chorus, I guess, which is saying how it's easier to just walk away. Kind of a dark message, but it sounds brighter because of the style that it's done. And then it goes into a very heavy riff, just sounds massive. And the vocal melody here is one of the weirdest melodies. I don't know how you would think to write this melody. He goes like, I've been shaped by peaks and valleys. It starts very high with almost like a screamed word, and then it just drops down into this like low, like almost like stylized, like valleys, kind of like this weird line where it just starts with all this energy and then it just like drops down and then it's just like on this stylized low word. Very weird. I would never imagine writing a vocal line like that. We get another sort of Daft Punk sounding chorus about how it's easier to just walk away. Another verse kind of describing the hardships of life, basically. And that's kind of what the theme is on that song. It's saying it's easier to just walk away. This is what's hard about life. It's easier to just walk away. This is what's hard about life. And then it goes into a solo section, sort of an outro with the solo that sounds like a single coil guitar, along with a normal guitar solo and like some laser shooting sound effects. And it's very bright and sort of, it has kind of a happy feel. And then we get the repeating of like the Daft Punk sounding vocals, how it's easier to just walk away. It's just very like happy, bright sound going on, all except for the drums themselves, which at that point haven't changed in the middle of the song. So it's this very like dark sounding, almost like a metal sounding drum kit booming over these like bright, happy tones and saying how it's easier to walk away. It's a very weird song, but it kind of works, and it's in a very weird way. I would never guess that a song like that would work, but it does. But the juxtaposition of the drum tone and the tone of every other thing at the outro of that song is pretty comical to me in a way. It's like amusing by itself. The next song is just called G, and I think it's supposed to mean God because it's told from the perspective of God and also showing how somebody in the world is basically misappropriating what God wants to happen. And so, but musically, it starts off sounding exactly like a Steve Vai song. I mean, I know I mentioned it before, like a neoclassical Steve Vai, but this could just be a regular Steve Vai. I mean, it's like very jazzy, very groovy. So we get these low sounding vocals that come in sort of as God, sarcastically telling people what to do. We get a couple of female vocals basically sort of praising him. And then we get a guy in the world who is misappropriating what God wants him to do and basically saying how he has prayed so hard and he got a spot in the front of the parking lot. So he's like totally missing the point. So at first, God is sort of at least amused by watching people messing up, but then by the end of it, he's just exasperated and he's like, I want to delete this whole thing and start over. Then we go to the song Ordinary, which it comes in with some synths, a very bright single coil sounding guitar with like sort of a funky strum pattern and sort of a funk beat, which leaves a lot of space. It's probably the most space in the drumming that there is out of any song. And this song sounds like it could literally just be a Daft Punk song in a way. It's also, the vocals come in and it is everything on this song is either very heavily, obviously auto-tuned, or it's a vocoder. And the point being that it's told from the perspective of a robot who has been created but doesn't understand how to really interface with the world. And so he's asking, like, can you tell me what things mean? Can you tell me how to feel? Can you tell me when I'm really alive? And wants to love in the world, and just says, can you feel my love? Like, can't even tell, like, just has no idea how to interface. And so it's kind of a sad song, you know, with the character being that robot. Or is it a robot? The next song is called Death, which is, it's a very hard cut stylistically, because we go from all the different styles we've had, a very sort of straightforward punk song, and then we go to what is basically a straightforward Frank Sinatra song. It's like very croonery. It starts off with violins and harp and nothing else. It's like there's not really any metal to be heard for a while, until just you know, it takes a while to get any sort of heavy guitar sound in the song. Basically like a crooning song describing about how this guy's having dreams that are very like normal, or sort of like everything's sort of status quo, and then he wakes up and washes his face, does his ordinary things, like makes his bed, and then he writes a note, and then he goes to the window of his apartment, which is like a high-rise building in the city, and he jumps out the window and he ends himself. So even though it seems like everything's fine and in place, that guy leaps out the window to his death. And it gets a little bit heavier at the end of that song. We get some heavy guitars, we get some more horns. It sounds very like there's a lot of tension, I guess, to feel him falling. But the whole build up to it is like everything is fine, and everything sounds so smooth, and it really does have a like Frank Sinatra crooner sounding, like there's swells of depth to some of the notes, and it's actually sung very nicely, but it's another very dark theme. And then the very last song on the album is called Life is But a Dream, I guess the title track, and it is a piano-only instrumental, and it has kind of like a ragtimey feel to it, because the piano tone is very even, but it has like a little bit of gain in the way that it's recorded. So it has like sort of an old-fashioned-ish feel, but it's not over the top, it's just subtle. And the song basically is very well played. It's a great song. I think it speaks for itself musically, but the theme that I take from it, and in knowing the title and the whole theme of the album, is basically to say that after everything we've just discussed, life is but a dream. So it's kind of like saying, you know, we might go to sleep and have a dream, and then we wake up and it's something else, and then we go back to sleep and we're dreaming and we're experiencing something else, and then we wake up and it's back to the real world. It's kind of like saying how life is almost like a dream. It's not the end of the world, but it's not real in a way. I mean, that is kind of one of the main themes of it, but kind of like how life is a dream. It's not real, and we'll wake up and experience something else, and we'll have another dream some other time. It's kind of like we're awake and then we're asleep, and then we do that a million times, and then at the beginning of life we wake up, and at the end of life we go to sleep. That's at least kind of how I take it. So it's really a fascinating album. This is one of the longer videos I've done recently of just talking, but I wanted to describe and basically review the album if I'm going to say this is my favorite album of 2023. But I wanted to give sort of a little bit of detail as to what I like about it and sort of what it's about. If you are watching this and you like this video, let me know in the comments, and maybe I'll consider doing some other content like this. But I just thought it was worth mentioning because this album was one of those that's kind of like something that I've been thinking about for months since hearing it, and have heard it over and over and over, and it's just genius. It's absolutely genius. It's nice in a very like dark way, but kind of like it's got some interesting themes and some things that aren't necessarily stressful, even though they're dark. So, yeah. Let me know in the comments what you thought, if you've heard this album, if my description makes you want to hear it, or if it makes you never want to hear it, and if you agree or disagree, and any other thoughts you might have. If you like this video, don't forget to share it and subscribe, turn on notifications, and I will see you guys next time.